Hello, y'all. I don't know where to start this morning. I've been thinking about this for a little bit, but I'm just gonna talk to myself. I'm usually really good at that, so so I'm just gonna do it and pretend like I'm talking to me when I'm talking to you. Um, I'm gonna talk about a lot of different subjects. I'm gonna try to get into the meat here real quick as I can. It's hard to find a trail in to start in here. So biblically, um, we're told not to read the Apocryphas of the Jews, and it's the Bible's like cliff notes for all these other books that we're not supposed to read, and there's a good reason that we're not supposed to read them. Right at the start of the book of the Apocrypha of the Jews, they talk about God creating, and it's not just He created this the first day and the second day. They actually talk about it, and they tell you, all the trials and the tribulations that He had. And I'm just gonna give you an example, real quick, just to let you know a little bit about the writer. So they talk about how God separated the waters from the waters, and the waters below were unhappy because the waters above were closer to God and could worship Him better or whatever, and they couldn't worship Him because they're not going to be heard as easy, and they wouldn't listen, and God had to call the angel of the face, which is the face of the earth, and He got the angel of the face to come in and destroy all of creation, and then He started over and He separated the waters from the waters, and this time to appease the lower waters, He said that the upper waters could worship God, but only if they get permission from the lower waters first, in order to worship. And that's kind of how the whole book's kind of written in that kind of fashion. And there's only one other people on earth that really talk about creation and stuff like that. So I don't know if you noticed right away, but like it is Native American, 100%. It is, and to give you more evidence of that, when Christopher Columbus came over, he brought the interpreters, and the way the story goes, I'm sure that it's a story and that they knew exactly what they were doing, but anyway, the story goes that he brought the interpreters over, and they could speak all the 70 languages, and they tried all the 70 languages, and the natives wouldn't speak to them in any of those languages. And but the two interpreters happened to both be Hebrews, and so when the interpreter was talking to his apprentice, he talked in Hebrew, and then one of the natives came right over and started conversating with them in Hebrew, and they all understood each other, and so every time they brought an interpreter over to talk to Native Americans, that interpreter had to speak Hebrew, and that's their language. So there you go. And then the next piece of evidence is the walking trail from North America to northern Europe, and it's under the ocean, and they say it's millions of years old or whatever, and it's like 15 feet under the ocean, and the thing is if you drop the ocean levels that 15 or 20 feet, you could actually walk everywhere on Earth, like all the little islands and the Galapagos and Australia and everywhere. So when the animals got off the ark, obviously the water was lower and they were able to walk everywhere. And then when the water came up, it cut off places like the Galapagos and Australia from bigger predator animals getting there. So then the smaller kangaroos and animals that aren't anywhere else in the earth, because they wouldn't have been able to survive the predators anywhere else in the earth, could survive in Australia because the predators never got there. But the North American pass, obviously the predators got here. We have bears and mountain lions, which are pumas, and they got like 7 names, but they're lions, and we got bears and wolves and all that stuff. So everything was making it over to here. Anyways, so did the Hebrews. We lost 10 tribes of the Hebrews, and that's the other thing, tribes. They're the only other people that call themselves tribes. The Native Americans and the Hebrews. Again, more evidence that they're the same people. Um, the other two tribes, we still know where they're at, and I may get to that. That's a whole other different story. But the natives then were able to, when the waters came up. That's what the next lesson is going to be in geology. So the Grand Canyon, they say, was cut by the Colorado River over millions of years. But what they don't tell you is that the Colorado River is lower in altitude than the top of the Grand Canyon. So the Colorado River would have had to run uphill to cut its way through the Grand Canyon. So it's impossible. The next thing they don't tell you is that there's two shorelines that cover 3 states. It would have been 2 massive lakes. When the Grand Canyon was filled in, they say they're millions of years old, but we can find the shoreline still. So when the Grand Canyon was filled in, 3 states behind it would have been all lakes and deep lakes, and because they would have been as deep as the Grand Canyon in spots, so hundreds of feet. And anybody who knows anything about dams, if you built a dam and you just put a little tiny cut in it, like if you build a dam in a ditch and you just touch it, and the water comes over in that spot, it immediately cuts a hole all the way to the level ground, cleans it right out, and drains your dam. So the evidence shows, and what happens there is there's no delta. If a river cuts through a canyon or through an area, when it gets to the mouth of the river, it dumps off the rock, and there's a big pile of sediment and rock, which is called a delta. And there's no delta for the Grand Canyon. And that happens when a dam breaks. When a dam breaks, it's so much pressure and it's so fast and there's so much extra water coming behind it that the delta actually gets washed right out to sea, and there's no evidence of anything. The third piece of evidence is that there's the Grand Canyon's like this, and there's rivers coming into it at this angle, and then they have to turn more than 90 degrees in order to run out. If they were cut over millions of years in slow time, they would run in like veins. They would all run in gradually together like that, which proves that the Grand Canyon was cut like that. I think it was probably made in about 2-3 hours, and then the lakes would have taken a couple weeks to drain or whatever. And I'm sure there's many of those canyons, and the Grand Canyon is just the biggest example of that. But just that amount of water would have been enough to bury those trails under the water, cut off all the islands, Galapagos, cut off Australia, cut off North America, and save the people that were over here safe, right? And that sounds really a God thing to do, cut off the people that are wiping out your people, because that's what was happening. There was a diaspora going on where the Hebrews were just kept trying to settle, and every time they did, the people of that area would start warring with them and destroying them and ripping down and burning and raping and doing, and then they'd move on, and then they'd settle, and then the same thing kept happening. They kept getting pushed further and further from their land. 2 tribes went all the way to the southern Africa and got trapped down in there in a place called I don't want to say it because I'm white and I'm not supposed to, but it's actually called Negro Land is what it was, and that's right where the Atlantic slave trade pulled out of. And so they went right to that land, grabbed them people, and brought them over to North America to build America, right? Because the Hebrews are the nation builders. Now, those Hebrews would have obviously they would have bloodlines would have mixed with Africans, and they would have gotten gradually darker, though they would have been dark to begin with because they were from Egypt. We call it Palestine, and we call it all these other names, but they just Africa. Sorry, that Egypt. We call it all kinds of things, but it's really it's Africa. It's all inside of Africa. So they're Africans, and they were African. Israel is in Africa. Anyways, the natives getting pushed the other way. Well, I'm sure there would have already been Asians walking across that trail and already have settled in North America, and the Hebrews would have been attracted to those pretty little Asian girls for sure. And so obviously that's why Native Americans look like a mix between an African and a Chinese or whatever, or an Asian, because that's pretty much what they are, and so that's why they have those beautiful traits that they have that they share in common. Anyways, the Native Americans wouldn't have been easy to repress. They retained freedom. They'd gotten away from all of the repressing mankind and resettled over there. They hadn't totally resettled, but they were getting there, and they had their teepees, but they also had wigwams, which are permanent teepees, like tents, and that's what the Hebrews lived in. They lived in tents all through the Bible. When you read it, they set up wigwams, and they'd have them open on four sides so that travelers could come from any side to come in and eat at your table and stuff through the day. Anyways, and the natives, same thing. And then they had their temporaries so that they could follow the herds and stuff, which are teepees, but and so that they could travel, because they would have migrated all the way to Mexico and became Mexicans, is what we call them now, but those are also Hebrews. And the Bible backs all this up with them being spread across the earth, and that they're being pushed out of their homeland. And this all happened just after Christ, so they really pissed God off for the last straw. He gave them their Messiah that they should have been saved through, and they murdered him, and they sacrificed him, and they did all the things that they shouldn't have done. And then so God used his usual tool, which is another race of people, to push them out of their land and war them and punish them for doing what they did wrong. He always then punishes the people that he used to. It always goes around, comes around, kind of thing. But anyway, the natives weren't repressible. They weren't slave material. But the other two tribes, coming from Egypt and getting pushed through Africa, they were slave material. So that's why they started the Atlantic slave trade, and that's why they needed to grab those Hebrews, because those Hebrews were the ones that could build the nation. They could farm, they could do all that stuff. People say that they built the pyramids, which is totally wrong. Pyramids were built by pre-flood man, probably some Nephilim and angels. They're all on fault lines, and there's a lot of criteria that most people don't know about. They're also on underground lava running underneath all of them, and there's criteria to pyramids that are astronomical. And then there's pyramids at the center of the Bermuda Triangle. There's pyramids just off the coast of Newfoundland. There's pyramids underneath the glaciers in up by the North Pole and stuff. And so the pyramids, the Egyptians and stuff, they weren't diving down to build pyramids underneath the oceans. It's just, sorry guys, you weren't doing it. It didn't happen. And they were built before the flood, and that's why they're unexplainable technology. And the other evidence to that is when the Hebrews were in slavery in Egypt to build all the buildings and the temples, they were of shoddy construction because they were taking things from them to make their work harder, because it was all about work. It wasn't about the building. They didn't care about the building. They actually cared so little about the building that if they didn't make their quota of bricks, they were taking Hebrew children and using them for bricks, and they would force the parents to mortar their own kids into the wall. And that's why the buildings were so shitty, because some of the bricks weren't bricks, they were people. And some of the bricks were really shoddy made because they stopped giving them straw, and they still wanted them to make their quota for the day of bricks, but they didn't supply the straw. They had to go pick their own straw and make the same amount of bricks and all this stuff. So then the actual creation of the bricks would have gotten shoddy as well because of the pressure of the work. So you can't do good work and fast work at the same time. You got to sacrifice one for the other. So the slaves didn't build the pyramids. Sorry guys, you built a lot. It was all real. It all happened, all that stuff. But the pyramids were built way before way before that. They're remnants of an older time. Uh, Next is I'm going to talk about that geologic time scale. The geologic time scale is something that they say is like it's their Bible for Earth science, and all dating methods, carbon dating, radiometric dating, radioactive dating, any of those dating methods all refer back to the geologic time scale. So if you carbon date something to be whatever has this amount of negative carbon in its blood, then you go to your geologic time scale, you find something that in the time scale that has the same amount of negative carbon, and then you know that they're the same age. And that's the way everything works. It all refers back to the geologic time scale. And the geologic time scale is only found in the right order in less than 20% of archaeological digs. So that means if you were to factor in all the foundations and all the holes and all the digging that goes on, like for roads, they got to blow up whole mountains a lot of times to drive a road through. Trains, same thing. You got to stay level to build train tracks, so they got to cut through the mountains and through hills and stuff in order, and it's not found at all in any of that. So you could say that it's found like 1% of the earth, but they say that it's our holy grail of science that we need to age the whole earth by. But then it's also found in the wrong order in archaeological digs 80% of the time. So that means that it's not found in another order 80% of the time. It's found in a whole bunch of different orders. And so if there was a worldwide floods, if the water's moving, it'll drop sediment off at one pace, like heavier things will get dropped off faster, and then the lighter things will settle on the top. If the water's not moving, then it'll work the opposite, and or things can level out. You can buy those little shakers, and they're little glass shakers like this, and you shake it up, and every time you shake it, things will level out different. All the sands will level out different, and make pretty designs for you. And so that's exactly what the geologic timescale is, and all these layered findings that they're saying are leftovers of time. It's not layers of time. It's just layers of sediment that was dropped off during a flood. And that's why, like at the gravel pits and stuff, as a heavy equipment operator, I've been in gravel pits, and they'll find, river rock, like a mountain of river rock over here, and then a mountain of gravel over here, and then a mountain of fill over here, and then this mountain over here is solid rock. And that's because it got dropped off by the flood. It didn't get set there by glaciers or any other stupid bullshit that they say. It wasn't through time that river rock got settled on the top of a hill. That's stupid. That's like there's also fossilized clams. How does anything fossilize on Earth? Nothing would fossilize, especially alive. Clams' sealed position means they're alive, so they have fossilized clams that are still living, found on the top of Mount Everest. So how did it get there? Clams don't climb mountains. And how did it fossilize without rotting or getting eaten or dying? Things only fossilize with extreme amounts of pressure. So in order to have that much pressure to make a whole fossil record, obviously the whole world had to be crushed under pressure quickly, all at once. Or at least many little floods all over the place in order to make these fossil records, because fossils don't just naturally form. When things die, birds come along and eat it, or whatever. Something comes along and eats it, or it rots. Time eats it. Worms get it. It doesn't fossilize. Nothing fossilizes. That's stupid. Not naturally, anyways. Or if it did, it would be very, 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 very few things. Wouldn't be whole time records. We're taught not to apply logic to the way we think. especially English-speaking people, were taught to spell words like enough and though, and they don't have to rhyme. And we can use OUGH in any word that we want to stick it in and make it make any sounds that we want to make it make, and that's that. And then we got all these stupid A before or E's, and all these retarded rules. There, and there. Like they are there and there. I understand that, but the other there, why don't we call it boobly? You know, there's all kinds of sounds that we could make to make different words for different meanings. Why do we have to use the same sounds and spell them differently? None of that makes any logical sense. There's no logic behind it. And we're taught that more and more and more. The only other dating method that we have for Earth science is we have the glaciers. We drill into glaciers, and we're told that it's annual layers. Every layer of the ice is an annual layer. That's every year makes a layer, and the glaciers are millions of years old. But we abandoned some World War II planes, and a billionaire dug them up in the 90s, and he had to dig through thousands of layers in order to get to the planes, proving that the layers are storms and hot and cold spells, not years. And so in a year there could be hundreds formed. In a single year there could be thousands formed, depending on how the weather was that year. And so, because I've seen, as a Canadian, I've seen multiple layers in a single storm, because you get your fluffy snow, and then you'll get like a wetter snow, and then you get freezing rain on the top, and it'll all make different layers in the snow. When you fall through it, the fluffy snow will still be fluffy, and then the icy snow on the top that you're walking on, that you fell through, will be like a 2-inch layer of solid ice that you can actually walk on, and there's nothing underneath it. It's just fluffy snow. And then there'll be another layer of ice from the storm before that you can still fall through. And I fell through right up to my crotch before, when walking on top of the snow in the woods. And then you get to where there's a tree branch going through, and all of a sudden you go through all the layers at once, and boom, you're up to your waist in snow. And it's all different layers formed in there. Anyway, so that when we applied the math of a few thousand layers in 50 years, and we apply that to our biggest and oldest glaciers, we find that our oldest glacier on Earth is 4,000 years old, which lines up with Noah's flood, which also lines up with our oldest desert on Earth, because there's a term called desertification, where we can actually age deserts, because there's this permanent, strong westerly wind in the area that forms the desert and grows it in one direction. Blah, there's a big fucking mathematical thing and a whole bunch of science behind it. But our oldest desert is also 4,000 years old, which also lines right up with the Bible. It's funny how quickly we can teach people, intelligent people, and teach them this stuff and then believe it all. And then I can even go to them and talk to them and tell some people what I just said, and they'll still believe their schooling over the facts that are evident and in your face. Like, this is all easy stuff. Nothing what I just said was all that complicated, unless you talk about what their side of the story is. If you get into what they say, then it gets really complicated, because they'll talk about all kinds of stupidity. Anyway, Babylon J.